The metoo movement has seen more and more people speaking up about sexual harassment and assault. But a recent study from the University of Massachusetts Amherst Center for Employment Equity found that nearly 2/3 of employees who report workplace sexual harassment face retaliation from their employers. I spoke with the report's authors in the studio.
Well, it's particularly interesting to me. In my work, I'm interested in gender and labor outcomes. And of course, with the present Me Too movement, sexual harassment seemed particularly relevant to this time. And it was really important for us to look at, well, what is happening to these people who are filing these charges and going through this process?
Actually taking advantage of the process that's available to them. And part of what the findings were is that nearly 2/3 of the employees who report workplace sexual harassment actually face some form of retaliation from their employer, which is an unfortunate finding, I would think. What did you think when you found that that's what the data led you to?
I think we were pretty shocked. And when we followed up on that, we also found that almost as many lost their jobs. And so there's a kind of a pattern of retaliation that seems to be integral to what happens to people who complain about sexual harassment.
So for you, for someone who studies the law, teaches the law protects people from this type of behavior, doesn't it?
Yes. So to me, the importance of the study is to really underscore the importance of those legal protections against retaliation in the workplace. But it also reminds us that when those protections only exist on paper or in theory, and they're difficult to enforce, then they're not doing the work that they should.
Yeah. Let's dig a little deeper into the findings of your report. So what your report in part said was that employees who file sexual harassment complaints face harsh outcomes, as we just discussed. 65% lost their jobs within a year of having made this complaint, and 68% were retaliated against by their employer in some shape or form. How did you react to this?
So one of the things that we found is also is that the vast majority of people who experience sexual harassment in workplaces do not ever file a charge. And I think it helps us make sense of that the cost of filing a charge is very high.
Because they might know that their colleague spoke up, said X, Y, or Z, lost their job, or were discriminated against in some way. Is that what you...
I think that's precisely right. And there's research that we didn't do that seems to suggest that the defense lawyers, the employer's lawyers, tend to use a kind of fairly aggressive approach to employees. That includes things like retaliation and a job loss. And it's not necessarily about that employee, but about sending a message to the other employees.
Mm-hmm. Meaning, you're shaking your head, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this just reminds me of cases that I've read about that, cases that work their way out of the EEOC and into the court system.
The equal opportunity.
Right, out of the, yes, because the law does allow plaintiffs who are dissatisfied or want to continue to press claims in court to do that if they've already sort of gone through the EEOC process. And there have been examples of high-profile cases where plaintiffs have won jury awards in retaliation cases. In fact, large jury awards. I'm thinking particularly of some cases that I've looked at. I study primarily athletics and education, so I've looked at cases involving coaches who've lost their jobs. Mm-hmm. But the thing that makes those cases unique is the high salaries that those particular plaintiffs earn, and the credibility of their retaliation claims. So those claims have been helpful to sort of expose the underlying sexual harassment that often doesn't receive the same kind of remedy in court, but kind of comes to light through the vehicle of these retaliation cases.
Am I correct in, off the top of my head, $24,000 was about the amount that people were receiving in your report? Is that what you found?
That was the average monetary benefit of those who received a monetary benefit through this process. The median amount was even low, around $10,000.
And so,
importantly, only a quarter receive anything at all.
Of those who file, right?
Of those who file, right. So the 1% get a big payday, and for us, a big payday is $100,000. There's other research that's about people who go to the private bar, and the numbers are pretty similar in terms of the amount of money. So people, the overall pattern here, whether it's through the EEOC or in the courts, is you might get something like $10,000 or $20,000, but probably won't. But you probably will lose your job.
And is there any recourse for the employee to turn back to the employer other than what we said, these cases they could file? But are there legal avenues for the employee to say, okay, now the employer needs to set up program X, Y, or Z so this doesn't happen again?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is a remedy that plaintiffs can pursue in the courts and with the EEOC as well, though we're not seeing a lot of large, widespread evidence that those kinds of remedies are successful. So I think it's a legitimate concern that this evidence getting out there might deter plaintiffs from coming forward if they feel like the efforts would be futile. I think nevertheless it's important that we're talking about this so that we understand that these are the limitations of law and that we can address sort of structural changes to sort of improve the access to justice. That when plaintiffs do get out of the EEOC and do get into court, then we're not talking about the same set of numbers. Not that going to court is always a highly successful route, but there is more to be done than just accepting the results of the EEOC process.
Is there a change that through this research or you reading the report that you would like to see or advocate for?
Yeah, I think as Don was mentioning earlier, we do see perhaps a need for employers to take more responsibility rather than leaving it up to these people who experience this discrimination to pursue these legal remedies on their own. Our report, we found only around 11% of these cases see a change in the workplace, so a change in the workplace practices or structure, and we would like to see that increase, I think.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, if when things go wrong in workplaces, most of the time it's treated as a managerial problem, right? This is something to be solved. We have conflict between some workers or between two different divisions or offices, then higher level management's job is to step in and solve this problem. Here, I think what happens is there's a redirect to step out of the problem and to redefine it as not a managerial problem or a problem of the workplace, but something that's sort of segmented off into the law, kind of a legal threat.
In sort of in that vein, are there industries or states that this is more pervasive? Did your findings show you anything there?
We do show there's a lot of variation across states in the kind of charging rates. And there's also variation across states in the degree to which people who've made sexual harassment charges get remedies. We don't have really good explanations of why. This is a new discovery. It's like a new social fact. Last week I was at the EEOC, and they were just shocked to learn it themselves.
Wow.
And so I do think that we have a lot more to do to figure out where their legal remedies are more effective and where employers' retaliation is more extreme.
And at this point, is there any one industry that you can point to as doing particularly well or particularly poorly in this area?
I think our findings support some previous research that show that more male-dominated or aggressive industries tend to produce higher sexual harassment rates, especially for women.
Mm-hmm. Women stood out in the findings, 47%, that's the percentage of the labor force that women make up, but then 81% file claims, according to your report findings.
81% of claims, that's right.
Yeah.
And so like specifically in terms of industries, what we see is that really male-dominated industries like construction and mining have very high levels of sexual harassment claims. Others, like public administration, government employment, much less. Interestingly, the highest sexual harassment claim rate for men comes from schools, from education.
And that tends to be more female-dominated.
Is that familiar?
No, that's interesting. I mean, it's not terribly surprising in light of what we know about sexual harassment and the role that it plays in society. It's not about sexual attraction. It's about power, and it's about preserving the power that you have. So in male-dominated industries, it's not surprising that that would be where the highest percentage of sexual harassment would occur. And so it's interesting to learn that the reverse is also true. The flip side
right.
is, yeah.
Though the basic association is way stronger for male-dominated than it is for like proportion women in an industry.
And race as well. You reported that African American women account for 7% of the workforce, but file 27% of those sexual harassment claims.
Yeah, it's hard to explain exactly what that is. Our intuition is that it's about exactly these power issues. The less powerful people are more likely to be harassed and treated poorly. And in that sense, sexual harassment is a form of a kind of a more general culture of disrespect, right? With a specifically sexual content. So that's likely to be what's going on. It's also, though, the case that there's a kind of intersectional process around discrimination. People are not simply discriminated against because they're women, because at the same time, they have a race or an occupation that's more or less powerful in the workplace. And so part of what's happening is that Black women experience more discrimination than white women, and so they have more bases by which to be aggrieved in the workplace.